All right, we are on Psalm 74. Arise, O God, defend your cause. A Meskel of Asaph. Kathy, what do you have?
A plea for God to help his people defend his cause and remember his promises. When we feel devastated or forgotten, we can plead to God for help, knowing that he hears. And then it says Asaph is the author or one of his descendants, since many believe this to be written after Jerusalem's fall in 586 BC.
Hmm. So it was believed to be written. Oh, I can get my pen to work.
Okay, I have a
After 580.
question before we even get started because I remember way back in the day when we were meeting at the church and the fall of 586 BC,
Mm-hmm.
because the first verse says, "Why have you rejected us so long?" Is that when that's when Babylon or who who took them? The Babylonians.
Babylonians. Yeah, I think the Assyrians took the northern kingdom, and then 200 years later, the Assyrians had taken over. No, the Babylonians had taken over the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians took the southern kingdom.
And how long was it till God says how long we reject us?
Wasn't it 70 years before they were allowed to go back with King Cyrus, the Persian king?
I'm asking you.
I think, if my memory's serving me correctly.
Okay, thank you.
My Bible has, if I'm wrong on that, feel free to speak up. Um, my Bible has a little side note. It says, pain in life is a universal experience. It falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. People often search for a reason behind trials and tragedies, but answers are elusive since humans cannot fully know the purposes of God. The Bible suggests that in some instances, pain might be punishment for specific sins, a test of faith, fatherly discipline, or a means to drive people to repentance. Usually, clear meaning is absent, especially in situations of ongoing suffering. From the pit of pain, the psalmist reached for confidence in God, the one who had been his faithful king for a long time. He knew of God's capabilities, yet wondered when relief would come. From the pit of pain, the psalmist reached for confidence in God, the one who had been his faithful king. Okay. Jesus frequently stepped into people's lives during a point of great pain. He performed a miracle for a grieving mother at a funeral in Luke 7. He touched and healed a man with leprosy in Matthew 8. He changed the lives of a bleeding woman and a worried father over the course of just a few minutes in Mark 5. Jesus is full of compassion for the pain caused by this world. He is eager for people to know that he cares deeply about their trouble. Jesus is a dependable source of comfort in the face of suffering. Um, 2 Corinthians 1 3 through 6. Kim, would you like to read this morning?
Yes, I will. O God, why have you cast us away forever? Why is your anger hot against us, the sheep of your own pasture? Remember that we are your people, the ones you chose in ancient times from slavery and made the choicest of your possessions. You chose Jerusalem as your home on earth. Walk through the awful ruins of the city and see what the enemy has done to your sanctuary. There they shouted their battle cry and erected their idols to flaunt their victory. Everything lies in shambles like a forest chopped to the ground. They came with their axes and sledgehammers and smashed and chopped the, the carved paneling, and set the sanctuary on fire and razed it to the ground. Your sanctuary, Lord. Let's wipe out every trace of God, they said, and went through the entire country, burning down the assembly places where we worshiped you. 9. There is nothing left to show that we are your people. The prophets are gone, and who can say when it all will end? How long, O God, will you allow our enemies to dishonor your name? Will you let them get away with this forever? Why do you delay? Why hold back your power? Unleash your fist and give them a final blow. 12. God is my king from ages past. You have been actively helping me everywhere throughout the land. You divided the Red Sea with your strength. You crushed the sea gods' heads. You gave him to the desert tribes to eat. And you command the springs burst forth to give your people water, and then you dried a path for them across the ever-flowing Jordan. Day and night alike belong to you. You made the starlight and the sun. All nature is within your hands. You make the summer and the winter too. Lord, see how these enemies scoff at you. O Jehovah, an arrogant nation has blasphemed your name. 19. O Lord, save me. Protect your turtle dove from the hawks. Save your beloved people from these beasts. Remember your promise, for the land is full of darkness and cruel men. O Lord, don't let your downtrodden people be constantly insulted. Give cause for these poor and needy ones to praise your name. Arise, O God, and state your ease against your case against our enemies. Remember the insults these rebels have hurled against you all day long. Don't overlook the cursing of these enemies of yours. It grows louder and louder. The end.
Any thoughts?
I just want to read my concordance real quick for just verse 1 and 2. God's anger against Israel had grown hot during the many years of their sin and idolatry. His patience endured for generations, but at last it was set aside for judgment. If you fall into sin but quickly seek God's forgiveness, his mercy may come quickly and his anger may leave quickly. If you persist in sinning against him, don't be surprised when his patience runs out. So they had been sinning for a long time, apparently. Generations.
Yeah. I double checked the information that I shared in the beginning with your first question. It was correct. But like when you think too, like when the Assyrians took northern Israel, Judah, southern Israel, had 100 to 200 years to get their act together, and they still didn't. But like, I mean, if you remember when we read in Isaiah how the priests were so corrupt that they were murdering their own people and making slaves of the children because they had absorbent taxes, like 40-50% on taxes, which enslaved the people. Like they've just always been evil.
Is this the same time when they were like having sex under every tree?
Some of them were, and then some of the like in Isaiah 66, it talks about how they were going and sacrificing their children to the other gods and then coming to the temple to worship. Like it was so messed up.
When I'm reading over this, I'm thinking in the very first few verses, the writer is questioning God, kind of like, well, we do the same thing. Like, why is this happening? Why are you allowing this to happen? And then they move into complaining, being very specific about all the things that are going wrong and again, questioning, complaining, just explaining how they feel about all this bad stuff that's happening. But then they move into, but I'm going to praise you anyway, because I'm going to glorify you. You are worthy. And so it's just that process. I feel like we all do the same thing. It's constant questioning.
Well, and did they not realize the evil they were doing? Like, did they get so like wrapped up in the culture around them that they just didn't even realize that?
Well, somewhere in there it said the prophets were all gone.
I think they just abandoned God. I think they just turned away.
Where were the priests? Or they were doing evil too. Is that
They
what
were
you're
evil
saying?
too.
They just chose not to choose God.
I think that's the same today. People don't recognize evil until they know what evil is. And if you don't have God, how do you know what's evil? Evil is against God. If you don't have God, how do you recognize evil?
Yeah,
So
and then
these guys,
when you're intermixed in a culture where evil is normal, I think
I
like
mean,
you're
just think of today and what is being accepted as normal, like you said,
Mhm.
which is actually sinning against God, but people don't recognize it because they aren't in the Word, they're not in God. So, and Lori was saying that they must have been sinning for a long time. They've been sinning since day one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
We had a conversation before you got on, Lori, Rita, but the sex cult is one of the things too. Like the integration of the deviant sexual behavior is part of corrupting the culture. Like that was a plan. That's why we can see like Netflix 70% has homosexuality, even in the kids stuff is like I forget close to 50% transgender. Like that's intentional. But if you look back to the cult and the things that they did, it was all
It
sexual.
says they'll call good evil and evil good,
oh, absolutely.
you know.
Am I cutting in and out? Apparently cut out.
There
So
we are.
I have no idea what happened. I think we need to get something fixed. Okay, so if we go to John MacArthur, 1 through 23, this community lament expresses, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. Um, this community lament expresses the agony of the people in the midst of the most excruciating of circumstances. It was bad enough that Israel's enemies had destroyed the temple in 2 Kings
The
25.
most excruciating of circumstances. It was bad. Back. Not back. God of his
No.
bond with Israel, plus his past supernatural deeds in the protection of Israel, and begs God to save his covenant nation now. And then now she's back.
I am back. It says I have a good connection, so I don't know what's going on. But since it's so bad, do you want to continue? But I feel bad making you read everything.
I don't care. I can.
I can try, and if I break up again, then just take over.
Okay.
All right. Um, the
I was
terror.
the Roman numerals.
Okay, the Roman numerals. You have the terror of abandonment, which is 1 through 11. That's a Roman numeral 1. Then a Roman numeral 2 is the remembrance of omnipotence, 12 through 17. And then the third Roman numeral is the plea for help, verses 18 through 23. And then the title, Asaph in 74. If this psalm reflects the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar in 586, Asaph would have been dead by then. Thus, this title may mean that the psalm was written by or sung by a later Asaph choir. Well, it had said at one point the other day that they also reused like psalms, like they would reuse them for other events. So it could have been a song of Asaph that they reused. Okay, verse 2, tribe of your heritage. The psalmist laments that even though God possessed Israel, he had not protected it. I think he did for a long time. Verse 3, direct your steps. An anthropomorphism, an anthropomorphism, meaning to hurry, to come, to examine the rubble. Verse 4, they set up their own signs for signs. The Ravengers had set up their military and pagan religious banners in God's temple. Verse 5, swing axes. Like lumberjacks surrounded by trees, the enemy had furiously destroyed everything in sight in the temple of God. Verse 8, the meeting places. God allowed only one sanctuary, and during Josiah's revival, God only allowed one sanctuary, and during Josiah's revival, the high places had been destroyed. 2 Kings 22 and 23. This may be a reference to the several rooms of the temple or to non-sacrificial religious sites throughout the land. Verse 9, our signs. While hostile and pagan signs were everywhere, signs of true Jehovah worship, such as altars for sacrifice, were missing. Verse 13, divided the sea, most likely a reference to God's creation activity rather than to parting the Red Sea. Sea monsters, this identifies whales, sharks, and other large sea creatures, including dinosaurs. Then for 14, for the Leviathan, it says to see notes on Job 41:1.
Chrissy, I have that marked if you want me to read it.
Sure, thank you.
Leviathan. This term appears in 4 other Old Testament texts, and it has Job, and there are 2 in Psalms and 1 in Isaiah. In each case, Leviathan refers to a mighty creature that can overwhelm man, but who is no match for God. Since this creature lives in the sea among ships, some form of sea monster, possibly an ancient dinosaur, is in view. Some feel it was a crocodile, which had scaly hide, terrible teeth, and speed in the water. But crocodiles are not sea creatures, and clearly this one was. Some have thought it was a killer whale, or a great white shark, because it was the ultimate killer's beast over all the proud beasts. It could have also been some seagoing dinosaur.
Thank you. 15, split open springs and brooks. This may be a reference to the universal flood in Genesis 7, or it may describe creation in Genesis 1. And then verse 17, fixed all the boundaries. As creator, God made day and night and the seasons. He divided the land from the sea, and he even established national boundaries. And then the last one, verse 20, the covenant. The people had apostatized. God, however, was still in an eternal covenant, the Abrahamic covenant with the nation. Genesis 17, 1 through 8. And that's it for John MacArthur. Any thoughts? I feel like I'm gonna have to go back and make a lot of notes. All right, happy. I have no thought.
Okay. Psalm 73 deals with a personal crisis of faith, but Psalm 74 moves to the national scene and focuses on the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 586 to 87 BC. The author is obviously not the Asaph of David's day, but a namesake among his descendants. Psalm 79 is the companion psalm, and you will find parallel passages in the book of Lamentations and in Jeremiah. Even though the prophets had warned the judgment was coming in 2 Chronicles 36, 15 to 21, the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple were catastrophic events that shook the people's faith. As he surveyed the situation, Asaph moved from despair to confidence, and in the end affirmed that all was not lost. The sanctuary, the Lord has rejected us, verses 1 to 11. This was a logical conclusion anyone would draw from beholding what the Babylonians did to the city and the temple. And there's a reference to Lamentations. But the Lord had promised not to abandon his people, for they were his precious flock, and he was the shepherd of Israel. Israel was the tribe of his inheritance, and the future of the messianic promise depended on their survival. Says the Authorized Version reads rod in verse 2, and the word can also be translated scepter. Number 17 shows the connection between the rods and the tribes.
In verse 2.
Yeah.
My verse 2 says, remember your congregation, which you have purchased of old, which you have redeemed to be the tribe of your heritage. Remember Mount Zion, where you have dwelt.
I'm not sure what this Authorized Version is. It says
Probably
the
King
Authorized
James.
Version. Oh, might be.
I bet it's King James.
Okay. He had redeemed them from Egypt and made them his inheritance. And he had come to dwell with them on Mount Zion. The word remember in verse 2 doesn't mean call to mind, because it's impossible for God to forget anything. It means to go to work on behalf of someone. Why did God permit a pagan nation to defeat the Jews and destroy their holy city and sacred temple? And why was he doing nothing about it? The people of Judah thought that the presence of the temple was their guarantee of security, no matter how they lived. But the prophet Jeremiah refuted that lie. Jeremiah even used the phrase everlasting ruins and warned that the temple would be destroyed and the nation taken into captivity. Many times in the past, God had intervened to save Israel, but now he seemed to be doing nothing. Asaph prayed, lift up your feet, take your hand out of your garment, get up and plead our cause. In verse 1, 11, and 22, do something. Shouting their battle cries, the Babylonian soldiers brought their pagan ensigns into the holy precincts of the temple and began to chop at the gold-covered panels of the walls. And there's a reference to 1 Kings 6. The sanctuary was where God had met with his people, yet he didn't come when they needed him. The word synagogues in verse 8 of the King James Version means meeting places, for there were no synagogues until after the Jews returned to their land following the captivity. There was only one temple and one altar for sacrifices, but there must have been other places where the people met to be taught the scriptures and to pray. Babylon was determined to show its power over the God of Israel. God's messengers had already warned the leaders and the people that judgment was coming, but they refused to listen. Therefore, the Lord didn't raise up any new prophets. As far as the captivity was concerned, the question, how long, in verses 9 and 10, was answered by Jeremiah. As far as the length of the Babylon's destroying and disgracing Israel's capital, city, and temple, there was no answer.
Does it give an address for Jeremiah?
It's chapter 25, and then chapter 29, verse 10.
Thank you.
The people felt that they were cast off forever, desolate forever, humiliated forever, forgotten forever. If we had been there, perhaps we might have felt the same way. The throne, the Lord reigns, verses 12 to 17. Verse 12 is the central verse of the psalm and the turning point in Asaph's experience. He lifted his eyes by faith from the burning ruins to the holy throne of God in the heavens and received a new perspective on the situation. No matter how discouraging his situation was, Asaph knew that God was still on the throne and had not abdicated his authority to the Babylonians. Jeremiah came to the same conclusion. Thou, you, is an important pronoun in this paragraph. God brings salvations, plural, on the earth in verse 12. So Asaph reviewed the salvation works of God in the past. The Lord orchestrated Israel's exodus and the defeat of the monster, Egypt. He provided water in the wilderness and opened the Jordan River so Israel could enter Canaan. Asaph even reached back to the creation and the assignment of territory to the nations. What a mighty God, what a mighty King. When the outlook is bleak, try the uplook. The covenant, the Lord remembers us, verses 18 to 23. Since righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne, it was logical for Asaph to move in his thoughts from God's throne to God's covenant with Israel. Asaph knew the terms of the covenant. If Israel obeyed the Lord, he would bless them. If they disobeyed, he would chasten them. If they confessed their sins, he would forgive them. If the Babylonians were mocking the Lord as they destroyed the city and temple, the Jews had mocked the prophets that God sent to them to turn them from their idolatry. There's a reference to 2 Chronicles 36:16. Israel had not honored God's name, but had turned his temple into a den of thieves. Asaph saw the nation as a defenseless dove that had no way of escape. Had the kings and leaders listened to their prophets and led the nation back to the Lord, all this carnage and destruction would have been averted. But the Lord was paying attention to his covenant. That was why he was chastening his people. Asaph was concerned about the glory of God's name and the survival of God's people. It was God's cause that was uppermost in his mind. The prophet Jeremiah had preached about the dependability of God's covenant, and Asaph was asking God to fulfill his purposes for the nation. The nation had been ravaged, the city of Jerusalem had been wrecked, and the temple had been destroyed and burned, but the essentials had not been touched by the enemy. The nation still had Jehovah God as their God. His word and his covenant had not been changed, and Jehovah was at work in the world. God is at work in our world today. We need not despair. The end.
Any thoughts? I have one on verse 8. It says, they said to themselves, we will utterly subdue them. They burned all the meeting places of God in the land. One of the things I was reading this morning was like how our freedom comes from God. Like that's a God-given thing, that we have freedom, and that's why we desire freedom so much. And that to control humans, they have to take away their belief in God to make them feel hopeless and not fight for their freedoms, which I thought was really interesting. Okay. Tony Evans, 1 through 11. Asaph expresses his sense of rejection by God in light of the affliction that God's people, the sheep of his pasture, were experiencing. He urges God to remember both the congregation that he had redeemed and Mount Zion where he dwelled. Asaph called on God to intervene because of the ruins in Jerusalem, the destruction that Babylon had wrought on the sanctuary. The invaders had smashed and burned God's dwelling place, and there was no longer a prophet to speak to the people for God and tell them how long this would last. Asaph understands that the enemy did not simply mock the people of God, he mocked God himself. Therefore, he pleads with God to punish them. And then 12 through 23, mine's actually quite short. In spite of the dreadful circumstances of God's people, Asaph confesses that God is still king. He has repeatedly demonstrated his sovereign strength over creation, often using creation as a means of delivering his people, as when he divided the sea during the Exodus. Thus, God is not without power. So Asaph emphasizes how the enemy has mocked the Lord and implores him not to forget his poor people and the people of his covenant. In this way, Asaph prays that God's concern for his own glory would be his motivation for acting. God's name was at stake. Therefore, Asaph appeals, rise up, God, champion your cause. When we pray for intervention in our circumstances, we too should desire to see God vindicated and glorified. So whatever assistance we need, Let us be motivated to see God's name lifted high in praise as he brings down the wicked and demonstrates his faithfulness to his people. The end. Any thoughts? None? Angie just left the doctor. Tilling, but not as quickly as they'd like. She's still not allowed to walk. All right, if there's no other thoughts on this. Lori, were you asking about the whatever, the Bohemian groves or the trees because of them, like saying about them when they swung axes in the forest? Were you asking because of that?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was just asking if that was the time period
Mhm.
when this came down, when they were being evil.
They were for sure. I think that the sexual sin is always a marker for Satan.
Well, and when you were froze up, Rita and I were talking about that we're living in the times when they will call good evil and evil good. We're in the middle of that, I think.
Well, and
Just-
the cult, it is a religion. The sexual perversion is a religion. All right. Well, then, no other thoughts. We'll do our trivia for the day. You guys will get this one, I'm sure.
Just real quick. That was my sister on the phone. Her CAT scan was negative. So praise the Lord for that.
Yes. She gets another opportunity to.
Don't even go there.
All righty, here we go. Who wrote the book of Proverbs?
Solomon.
Yes,
Well, lots of people.
Solomon. You were correct.
Who said that?
Rita, she gets the gold star. All right, this concludes reading God's word for today. Until tomorrow.
Sure.
For certain.